Okay, so it should be that we're live. I've just pushed out something on my socials as well, so hopefully people will be tuning in. I see there are a few people who are in already. I know I haven't done this for a while, like doing a live stream, but hopefully all things go well. Um, Today, I have a very exciting guest with me, Vrinda Vaid. I've been really interested in her work for a while and I've been following her on her socials. She's putting out like some really good content. So, yeah, without further ado, I'll add her to the stream and yeah, we can get going with the conversation. Hey, Vrinda, welcome to the All podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So, how's your day been like? I know you were a little late to the call, but like, yeah, was there, what's keeping you busy?
My day was it was very slow, if I am
Fair
supposed
enough.
to say that, because I've been shooting for quite some time now, and I just needed a bit of a break, which is why अभी मेरा cycle थोड़ा सा धीमा हो गया है. तो कल और
Mm-hmm.
आज मैंने बहुत slowly snail's pace से चीजें की हैं, तो which is why I was late. No big reason for that. Just the आलस in me. That's all.
No, that's totally fair. So before we really get into some of the questions that I had planned on board, which I really want to ask you in this stream, but could you give us like a little bit of a background about yourself, like how you got into doing what you do, and yeah, even for the listeners, because I don't think I've given quite a good intro. So like, what is it that you do?
Okay, so I do a lot of things. I have been a part of the screenwriting industry for 3 years now. So I do write scripts also, I do write lyrics also. So everything which operates within the domain of language, everything which involves linguistics, writing, and not content writing per se, but stuff that we call creative writing, stuff that we call जिस जो हवा में से हम निकाल लेते हैं वो सारी चीजें मैं करती हूँ. Apart from that, I run two podcasts full time, one of which is Sukhan, which is my maiden podcast, which is now 3 years old, and I recently started another podcast which is called the Nagma podcast. सुखन जो है, सुखन का मतलब होता है द आर्ट ऑफ कॉन्वर्जेशंस एंड पोएट्री. And because I am from the domain of poetry, majorly Hindustani poetry, which is Hindi Urdu poetry, तो वो पॉडकास्ट मैंने बस ऐसे ही मजे मजे में शुरू कर दिया था, एंड देन इट जस्ट ब्लू अप एंड जस्ट बिकेम क्वाइट अ थिंग. और फिर वहां पर मैंने काफी एक्सपेरिमेंट किया कॉन्वर्जेशंस के साथ, पोएट्री के साथ, मोनोलॉग्स के साथ, सिर्फ अपने साथ बैठकर स्क्रिप्टिंग करने के साथ. And then I did a few episodes on pop culture songs, deconstructing those songs, majorly from Bollywood, because I'm a Bollywood buff and I am from the industry itself. तो वहां से मेरा आइडिया निकला नगमा को शुरू करने का. सो देन आई मेड इट इनटू अ कंप्लीट डिफरेंट पॉडकास्ट व्हिच इज कॉल्ड द नगमा पॉडकास्ट, वेयर इन वी टॉक अबाउट द लिरिक्स ऑफ अ सॉन्ग एंड व्हाट important songs hold in movies, right? और उसके लिरिसिस्ट को क्यों हम क्रेडिट नहीं देते जबकि वो प्रेजेंट डे में पोएट होता है हमारे लिए, राइट? So that is what the podcast is about. Apart from this, what do I do apart from this? I've recently converted Sukhan into a maiden video show, which is now called Sukhanvar, wherein I sit with people in conversation, and we tape it on with a good setup, with a good studio, and all of that. इसके अलावा क्या है यार, मैं सोचने की कोशिश कर रही हूँ. I think I've been able to
No.
put everything
I mean,
under the.
I'm pretty sure we'll be getting into most of that stuff during our conversation
Yeah,
here today.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
this is sort of a question that I've started doing off recently. That
Mhm.
so basically, it's that okay, so it's sort of like a hypothetical. So if you could be like a fly in a room uh, of three intellectuals, three individuals who you really admire, past, present, or future, and listen to into their conversations, who would they be? So the reason I sort of ask this question is that it sort of gives me a good understanding, like what your influences be in terms of like how your art then factions out when you sort of put stuff out. So yeah,
Mhm.
could you give it a little bit of a thought?
I think I am a perennial fly on the wall who's wanting to listen to. I mean, three is a very small number, but if I were to put it that way, I think पहला इंसान तो गुलजार साहब होंगे, क्योंकि मैं उनको बहुत ज़्यादा सुनती हूँ और मैं उनको मतलब पहले ऐसा था कि मैं उनका बहुत मज़ाक भी उड़ाती थी कि क्या लिखते हैं, कुछ समझ नहीं आता है एंड देन इवेंचुअली आई गॉट अराउंड टू अंडरस्टैंडिंग व्हाट ही रोट एंड यू नो द काइंड ऑफ I don't know, nuclear energy that he has inside of him. So that is going to be one person. Then the second person is going to be, I think you must be knowing, or you might not be knowing also, Nilesh Misra. So he has his own series of,
Okay.
you know, interviews, and he is a bona fide lyricist from Bollywood, and he's also a radio person. तो नीलेश मिश्रा और बहुत सारे लोग उनको सुनते भी हैं क्योंकि वो
Hmm.
बहुत अच्छा करते हैं. I think the third person would be, um, I don't know, maybe myself.
Yeah.
Because when I कभी-कभी ऐसा होता है कि मैं खुद से एसोसिएट करना बंद कर देती हूँ और कभी-कभी ऐसा होता है कि मैं खुद से कुछ ज़्यादा ही एसोसिएट करने लग
हाँ,
जाती हूँ.
हाँ,
So
हाँ.
that is also, I think it's a, I don't know, disorder.
No, but
But
that's a really
yeah,
like nice combination because I've listened to a lot of Nilesh sir's work and yeah, he's like a really good conversationalist. So
yes.
even if obviously like Nilesh sir has so much talent of his own, I know there's so much that he can contribute in itself. But I would
Yeah.
just be fascinated for him to like interview Gulzar sir, like just nitpick whatever he can because he's just like a master at that.
Yeah, yeah. No, Gulzar Saab has already done many, many, many conversations. There's one with Irfan,
Mm-hmm.
which is Guftagoo, which everybody knows about. And Gulzar Saab का actually problem बोलूँगी या उनकी एक luxury बोलूँगी क्योंकि उन्होंने पूरी ज़िंदगी अपना ये कि now he's, you know, into his shell and not wanting to have those conversations much, which is fine also because we have a complete treasure of, you know, what he thinks, how he thinks, his poetry. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I am a firm believer in बातें कभी खत्म नहीं होनी चाहिए और बातें होती भी नहीं है कभी खत्म और बातों में से हल निकलता है बहुत सारी चीजों का तो इसलिए बातें कभी भी खत्म नहीं होनी चाहिए.
नहीं सही बात है. I mean, sort of like tangentially related to that is ki, what do you think creativity is in some sense, like because so many of your endeavors are like in the creative space, so is it like do you limit it down to something, like do you think there is a definition that one can put on it, or like how do you sort of look at it, because obviously each of the endeavors you're doing are, even though you may have a core compass of how you sort of want what sort of vision you have with your art, but in some sense they are different endeavors in different mediums as well.
That's
So
true.
yeah, what do you make of creativity as a whole, the role it plays in society, वगैरह वगैरह?
I think those are two different questions. अगर पहला question ये होगा कि creativity असल में होती क्या है, तो I think it's a two-sided coin. Why? Because एक तरफ creativity actually कुछ नहीं होती है, right? There is no person who is creative because every bit of that everything is mimicry at the end of the day. क्योंकि हमारी जो लैंग्वेज है या हम जिस तरीके से चीज़ों को समझते हैं, दैट इज़ बोरोड फ्रॉम जनरेशंस एंड जनरेशंस दैट हैव कम बिफोर अस, राइट? तो हमारा कुछ भी एज़ सच ओरिजिनल नहीं है, राइट? बट on the other hand, I would say that, you know, creativity is that little filament that makes the bulb go, you know, aha.
Yeah.
तो मतलब मेरे साथ तो ऐसा होता है कि शायद साल में कोई एक ऐसा यू नो मोमेंट आएगा या 2 साल में कोई एक ऐसा मोमेंट आएगा व्हिच इज गोइंग टू बी यू नो अ यूरेका मोमेंट कि भाई अरे ये तो शायद मैंने सोचा नहीं था कि मेरे अंदर से निकलेगा या किसी भी और के अंदर से निकलेगा, राइट? सो आई डू थिंक दैट 90% ऑफ व्हाट एनीबॉडी डज is mimicry, and not mimicry does not mean that you have to, you know, insult that per se. मिमिक्री का मतलब होता है कि आप दूसरे से किसी कुछ बोरो कर रहे हैं, यहाँ से कुछ बोरो कर रहे हैं और फिर उसको एक आकार दे रहे हैं, राइट? सो आर्टिस्ट का हिंदी होता है कलाकार, कलाकार का मतलब होता है वो जो किसी चीज को आकार देता है, राइट? So
Mm-hmm.
we are in some way or the other giving shape to something for maybe ourselves, for maybe generations to come, right? तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है 90% of that is mimicry, and 10% of course of that is going to be something which is going to, you know, be the eureka moment for you, जहां पर आप कहेंगे कि यार ये चीज शायद मैंने खुद के अंदर से ही बनाई है, ये किसी और ने मुझे दी नहीं है. So I think that would be the answer to your question.
Do you think 10% भी आप थोड़ा ज़्यादा बोल रहे हो कि, or do you think 10% is like a right
हाँ,
approximation, because
हाँ,
you might have known of Varun Grover, and there's so many sort of artists who talk
हाँ,
about this कि
हाँ,
it's almost like when you're in the creative process, and everyone has a different creative process, ki when you're sitting down to write, or if you're a painter, then you're in front of the canvas or whatever. So it's not like ki it's your thoughts that are on the paper or on the canvas. It's almost like it's a, as you said, you're just a medium through which the ideas flow, or and yeah, so that's sort of what points me towards ki, like in that sense, like everything in society is what contributes to that, is what contributes to you pushing out whatever you are pushing out in some sense.
I mean, yeah, I mean that is true. I mean, when I said 10%, that was looking at it through a macro lens, not a micro lens. कि भाई अगर मतलब 100 लोग हैं एक कमरे में, तो उन 100 लोगों की मैं बात कर रही हूँ शायद. और ये हर आर्टिस्ट के लिए मतलब मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि ये चीज होती है, स्पेशली बिकॉज वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट अ डोमेन विच इज सो पॉपुलर, राइट? इफ वी टॉक अबाउट सिनेमा, और इफ वी टॉक अबाउट म्यूजिक मेकिंग, और इफ वी टॉक अबाउट इवन द आर्ट ऑफ कॉन्वर्जेशन. सी, बिकॉज बात करना ना किसी से, वो भी अपने किस्म का एक आर्ट है, क्योंकि हर कोई नहीं बात कर सकता हर किसी से. कई लोगों को बहुत शर्म आती है बात करने में, कई लोग कॉन्वर्जेशन इनिशिएट नहीं कर सकते. आई वाज दैट पर्सन हु यूज्ड टू जस्ट बी, वो फ्लाई ऑन द वॉल वाली बात हुई, तो आई वाज दैट पर्सन हु यूज्ड टू बी जस्ट अ फ्लाई ऑन द वॉल, हु वाज जस्ट ऑब्जर्विंग पीपल फ्रॉम अ डिस्टेंस, नॉट वांटिंग टू इंटरैक्ट विद देम, एंड जस्ट बीइंग हैप्पी विद द फैक्ट कि भाई अरे वो बात कर रहे हैं ना, मैं क्यों अपनी आवाज उसमें डालूं, राइट? बट देन इवेंचुअली आई गॉट अराउंड टू अंडरस्टैंडिंग दैट अगर आप किसी को सिर्फ सुनते रहेंगे और उससे जाकर अपना ओपिनियन शेयर नहीं करेंगे, राइट, देन इट्स जस्ट, आई थिंक इट्स अ यूजलेस प्रोसेस, बिकॉज दैट्स नॉट लाइफ. दैट्स जस्ट इट्स इक्वल टू डेथ, बिकॉज यू जस्ट ऑब्जर्व तो हम सब कहीं से भी कर सकते हैं, उसमें इन्वॉल्व होने की क्या जरूरत है, राइट? सो द फैक्ट दैट if you have to enter the puddle, you have to get dirty with it, you have to get dirty with the mud, otherwise उसका कोई फायदा नहीं है. फिर साफ सुथरे बैठे रहो साइड में कोने में.
हाँ, and that in some
What is that?
and in some sense that is like the definition ना, कि I think कई लोग कोशिश करते to like sort of define art, and they say that, and it's sort of a conundrum, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it. Ki, for example, if you're sitting down and if you're working on a piece of art, and if you just keep it to yourself, is that then art? Or if you then sort of show it to someone, is that then what becomes art in some sense? Like आपने like अपना journal लिख लिया, तो आपकी journal एक art, like is it a piece of art? Or if you only sort of publish it out, is that what accounts to art? So that's also sort of fascinating to sort of unpick key, like what contributes as art and what doesn't, because that is a very
Yeah,
valid argument na, ki you can just keep to yourself.
right.
And
I think that's a different debate altogether, because these two things, of course, they go parallel to each other, but I don't think these two things converge at any given point of time, because I'll tell you what, this I've realized over a period of time, that I think because there's so less understanding and acceptance of art within our mainland, within the sphere, the geographical location that we are situated in, and because we consider एक तरफ हम आर्टिस्ट हैं जहां पर वो फिल्मी स्टार्स हैं और वो स्टारडम है और वो सब कुछ है, और एक तरफ हम अपने बच्चे को आर्ट्स परस्यू नहीं करने देते हैं कॉलेज में. सो आई थिंक that is a juxtaposition. But to be getting back to what you have just asked me, I think हमें ना फर्क करना नहीं आता between art and craft, right? These are two completely different things. Arts and crafts हमको 5th standard में सिखाया जाता था just for the sake of it. Drawing है, painting है. But the very basic difference between art and craft is that if I write something today, if I paint something today, right, and don't show it to anybody, it is still art, because it's come out of me, and I had that talent, I was born with it, that's why I can play with colors, or I can play with words that way. वो मेरे अंदर की शिफा है, वो मेरे अंदर की कला है, right? And then if I show it to someone and that person appreciates, or that person just rejects what I've done, that is also art, right? So art is not about keeping it to yourself or showing it to someone. Of course an artist wants an audience, because वो शायद आर्टिस्ट की रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं है, वो एक इंसान की रिक्वायरमेंट है, राइट? टू गेट वैलिडेशन, टू बी एक्सेप्टेड विद इन अ गिवन डोमेन. दैट इज व्हाट एवरी ह्यूमन बीइंग वांट्स. दैट्स नॉट रिलेटेड टू आर्ट. बट हाँ, आर्टिस्ट जो होता है वो खेलता इंसानी जज्बात से है, वो ह्यूमन इमोशंस से खेलता है, तो इसलिए उसको वैलिडेशन भी उतनी इंपॉर्टेंट होती है. एंड देन इवेंचुअली जब मैं लिखना लगातार शुरू करूंगी, हर हफ्ते में एक चीज लिखूंगी और सोचूंगी कि यार कोई चीज निकली है मेरे अंदर से, देन दैट विल बिकम अ प्रोसेस ऑफ क्राफ्ट, बिकॉज देन आई विल नो कि अच्छा यहाँ से ये शब्द निकाला जाएगा तो अच्छा लगेगा, यहाँ से ये कलर ज्यादा डाला जाएगा तो अच्छा लगेगा. So I think that is one distinction that we need to be able to make, and we will be able to make, provided we give that kind of, time, that kind of sadhana to whatever art form you are, practicing. Because हम ऐसी दुनिया में रहते हैं जहां हमारा कोई गुरु नहीं है, क्योंकि हम किसी परंपरा से नहीं आए हैं. तो इसलिए खुद का गुरु होना एंड टू बी एबल टू वैलिडेट योरसेल्फ फर्स्ट एंड बिलीव इन योरसेल्फ फर्स्ट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, एंड नॉट लुक फॉर दैट वैलिडेशन आउटसाइड. दैट्स व्हाट आई, पता नहीं, दो शायद अलग अलग चीजें मैंने बोल दी हैं, बट आई थिंक यू विल बी एबल टू मेक सेंस ऑफ इट.
Is that like the only way you can push like your purest form of art? If it's like not that you're pandering to the crowd, but ki jo like what you find is true, and what you find is that this is what sort of this is what captures my essence of what I want to put out. And then it's fine, like whatever people may make of it, wo baad mein dekha jayega, but this is how I want to push my art out. And then it doesn't matter if one person sees it or a million people see it or what have you.
See, if you are going into it for the views and the number, then तुम पहले ही स्टेज पे अपने आप से झूठ बोल रहे हो, आई वुड से. क्योंकि आप कोई अंबानी की औलाद तो हो नहीं कि आप निकलोगे और आप छा जाओगे दुनिया में. That's really not how destiny happens, or that's not how मेहनत happens, I would say, right? So for you to be, वही मैं यही बोल रही थी कि एक डिसिप्लिन होना उसमें बहुत जरूरी है. डिसिप्लिन का मतलब ये होता है that you're doing what you have to do because you know that's your truth, right? Every individual in this world has their own set of, truths and their own set of lies, and you have to be able to recognize what is true and what is not true to you, and which is inherent in us. क्योंकि जब हम पैदा होते हैं, वो समझ जो होती है, वो बोला जाता है हमें दुनिया देती है, बट वो हमें दुनिया नहीं देती है, क्योंकि हमारा खुद का एक कंसाइंस होता है जो कि समझता है कि ये चीज ठीक है, ये चीज ठीक नहीं है, right? Not to get into the philosophy of it, and not to get Freud and Sartre into this, but एक बहुत basic principle यही कहता है कि आप एक चीज करोगे, शायद आपको 10 साल लग जाए उस चीज करने में, आपके पास लग्जरी एंड लिबर्टी ऑफ दैट 10 years है या नहीं है, वो आपके ऊपर है, क्योंकि वो प्रिविलेज डिपेंड होता है, वो आपकी वर्क क्लास पे डिपेंड होता है, आप सोसाइटी में किस हायरार्की पे प्लेस्ड है, वो उस पर डिपेंड होता है. सो आई थिंक if you're getting into it for the views and the counts, then don't get into it at all. You'll be, आज ही मैं किसी का कोरा पर एक आंसर पढ़ रही थी कि you'll be better having a day job and earning that kind of money out of it, and you'll be happy with it. So don't get into this. अगर इसमें आपको ना पड़ेगा कि अगर आज एक व्यू आया है तो फिर 10 साल बाद वो ही व्यू लाख में भी कन्वर्ट हो जाएगा, लेकिन आपको उसके साथ वो जस्टिस करना पड़ेगा, आपको अपने साथ वो जस्टिस करना पड़ेगा. आई थिंक दैट्स व्हाट कंसाइंस इज. कंसाइंस यही होती है, सबकॉन्शियस यही होती है.
मैं
Well, I'm
आपका
not
एक
answering your questions at all.
नहीं, but that's fine क्योंकि it's fine if you take like tangential things. I don't answer most questions myself. I try to shy
Because
away
these
from
are
them.
questions that you can't, these are not that
Exactly.
emergent. These are
Yeah,
great
yeah,
questions.
yeah. And
Hmm.
so what I was sort of leading up to, ki I was watching your interview with Noor Chahal and I really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
And something I took away from that particular interview was that ki she mentions how many people in society, as you were talking about as well, ki we admire these film stars, we admire these painters, but we'd be shy if, let's say, our cousin, our daughters, our sons go into, let's say, the arts or something of that sort. So mera सवाल ये है कि basically, and she was really adamant ki however much we may discredit art, in some sense it's very ingrained in us, that
Yeah.
however we look at the world, it is through those lenses of the art we've consumed, the stories we've read, the paintings we've seen, those kind of things.
Hmm.
Do you, I don't think you sort of gave an answer in that particular thing. I understand you were only interviewing. What do you sort of make of it? Ki, do you think it is as much of an importance that she puts on it, or do you think it is sort of one of the many things in society that makes us who we are, or makes societies who they are as well?
See, art directly springs from culture, right? And culture is the thread of any society. Culture, tradition, our heritage, our roots. whatever those might be. There are people arguing out there who think that Mughals did much damage to the culture. They brought in Islam, they brought in Urdu as a language, they brought in a lot of other things that we are so proud of right now. But now people are slowly recognizing कि राजपूतों ने भी शायद उतना ही काम किया था उस चीज में जितना हम मुगलों को glorify करते हैं. So I think culture is actually the foundation of any society. मतलब किसी भी society की बात कर लो, सिर्फ हमारी society की नहीं. And I also think that this very wide gap between us appreciating a person who is distant, who's pursuing their own art or their own craft, while at the same time we ostracize anybody within our periphery who's wanting to pursue that and who's wanting to get on that stage. So this has a very basic logic. और ये देखने वाले हो सकता है थोड़ा सा विड्रॉ हो जाए ये मैं जो बोलने लगी हूँ, but after a certain age all of us do watch adult content, right? Because that's what that stimulates our brain and that teaches a lot of things about our body, how it responds to sexual fantasies and all of that. But at the same time हम बाहर जाके उस चीज को नहीं बोलेंगे कि यार मैंने अभी इस टाइम पर ये साइट पर ये सब कुछ देखा था और ये मेरे पास नहीं आया था, मैंने खुद सर्च करके इस चीज को देखा था, right? So that is a distinction that has always existed, right? The fact that I am slowly getting into screenplay writing, and now the kind of shows and the kind of content that is getting out and the kind of content that's getting written also has a lot of explicit content also that gets involved, right? And the fact that my parents today tell me that we don't want to watch anything if you write anything such as this in the near future, right? That is their own set of prejudices, their own set of their parents not giving them that leverage to sort of talk about it, and them giving me the independence to at least write it if they don't want to watch it also, right? So they are accepting of the fact that this is how the world works right now, this is the way of the world, and she might as well do it because that's accepted, that's okay now. But they might not watch it, and that's completely their discretion. मैं उनको force भी नहीं करूंगी वो watch करने के लिए, देखने के लिए, right? So I mean again, when I wrote this, I gave additional dialogues to this short film, which then got critical acclaim, and it had Shabana Azmi, it had Swaraji, it had all of these people, and it was based on a lesbian relationship, right? And I think this was back in 2019 that I wrote this dialogues for this. And then I told my parents that this is the first film that I've worked in, this is how I've given dialogues. So they asked me, what is the premise of the film, story क्या है? मैंने स्टोरी उनको बता दी कि क्या है. Now this is 2019 and we still aren't that accepting of same sex relationships, and anybody talking about a same sex relationship means that person is either gay or lesbian, or that person belongs to the transgender community, which I think shouldn't be an insult for anybody. Just say if you're straight or if you belong to the community. So the fact that they till date do not want to watch that film is completely their discretion, right? It's not my job to convince them. अगर वो देखते हैं तो अच्छी बात है, नहीं देखते हैं तो भी अच्छी बात है, 10 साल बाद देख लेंगे, right? So yeah, I don't know, I just
नहीं तो basically like a तो basically sort of a follow up उसमें कि जैसे you said कि art is sort of downstream from culture. Don't you think it's the other way around? That culture is only informed because of like art, and I would say art is then like a subset or like downstream from religion in some sense. So whatever our religious traditions are, अगर आप कोई भी सब artworks देख लो, in my estimation at least, the best of the artworks are in some sense religious. And by that what I mean is that they don't particularly have to be having ki religious iconography, yeah, explicitly mentioning whatever Hindu traditions or Christian traditions or whatever, but implicitly they're based on that substructure. अगर आप समझ रहे हो तो basically like because we are influenced so much by the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, in a manner, the manner in which we look at society and the society in which we are brought up is through those myths. It's is through those traditions. I said myths, get cancelled. But yeah. But do you understand what I'm trying to say there? And in some sense, that if you look at it in a Western world context where maybe Christianity is more predominant, that is sort of the substructure over which everything springs. Do you
Right.
do you sort of buy that argument?
Um, I see all of these texts as text. This was the one principle that was taught to us right when we began studying English literature or different world literature.
Mm-hmm.
That anything that we were taught, and this I'm saying because in the first semester we were given the Gita
Mm-hmm.
to sort of have our opinion on how do we think that particular shlok translates, or how do we, and that was all informed from whatever we had heard of the Gita, or whatever was passed on to us through our parents, and us being very young people, just I think 18 19, and matlab 18 19 साल में किसी का क्या opinion हो सकता है, especially on religion and
Yeah, yeah,
spirituality, which
yeah,
is so
yeah.
ingrained in our system, right? So I mean, I don't have a particular stand wherein I can say that it's the other way around, but I will always say that let us all just look at these things as stories, right? कि ये कहानी जो है ये तुलसीदास ने लिखी, ये श्लोक जो है ये कबीर ने लिखा, ये दोहा ये कबीर ने लिखा. So I think it's just stories, and we've been trained on stories, and which is why we are such fabulous Indians, or South Asians are such fabulous storytellers, because that's in our grain.
Yeah.
It's in our nerves. The fact that we've grown up on stories, और कुछ कहानियां होती है जिनमें हम इतना ज्यादा विश्वास डाल देते हैं कि वो कहानियां हमें असली लगने लग जाती हैं, जबकि वो
हाँ.
सिर्फ कहानियां हैं, right? Uh, you might as well just worship, if I was to give a pop culture reference, if you might as well just worship Mehuna as a movie,
हाँ.
because Shahrukh was fab in that, right? And you might as well just ostracize it, saying कि अरे ये तो Bollywood है, इसको क्या करना है, मानना है नहीं मानना है, क्या करना है, right? Because Bollywood is an actual religion in this country that we
Mm-hmm.
are sitting in, right? So yes, that was when my perspective towards certain things changed, क्योंकि मैं हमेशा दूर दूर रहती थी ये धार्मिक पंथों से और इन सारे टेक्स्ट से. बट नाउ आई वेरी फॉन्डली रीड एवरीथिंग व्हिच कम्स टू मी, द be it be the Vedas, the Gita, any text, any religious text that makes me understand any religion in the world, right? Which is why I was also interested in sitting with Noor Sahiba and talking to her, because I personally, as an individual, associate the most to the Sikh religion, right? Because like I have a familial history, so I am a half Sardarni, if you were to say that, but I haven't really studied the Sikh religion so much for me to be able to imbibe that in my lifestyle and in my culture, right? In the way I live life. So yeah, I do think that these need to be taken as texts. But हाँ, इनमें जो चीजें हैं जो बुनियादी होती हैं वो अगर आप अपने अंदर ले लेंगे, तो then you become a better individual, a better artist, a better part of the society, I would say.
तो that's what it is for me कि for example जैसे आपने मेहुना का example दिया, let's say
Hmm.
1,000 years in the future, if
Hmm.
that story still exists and people are retelling it and retelling it and retelling it, what would perhaps happen was that it would be far-fledged in a manner that's much grander than maybe the director had sort first envisioned. And if
Shahrukh
that
would be God then. Shahrukh
yeah,
would be God.
exactly. And
Mhm.
if that story sticks, then like I think it's very difficult to then say ki is it real or not real. It's like the same with the Ramayana or the Mahabharata. When people sort of just say I sort of stand in the same way as you do. I sort of
Hmm.
look at them as myths, and if they sort of inform us to lead a better life, then well and good for me. That's fine. I don't even want to get into conversation. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think that is what it is. But मेरे को ये भी नहीं लगता कि if we then try to if we then try to then only see them as texts in some sense, I don't know what else we can ground ourselves in,
Hmm.
because I don't know if our moral structure is only based on logic, if that makes sense. I think it is based on these myth stories, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So I think that is really difficult to untangle. But huh, do you
See,
sort of think about this ki if you sort of remove all these stories, there would inevitably be a story that would come about, because also in the modern day science is becoming more of a religion in some sense as well, right? That if you don't believe science and whatever, so
hmm.
that is what I'm trying to come to ki I think we need stories to ground ourselves in, and if we try to think objectively without them, I don't think if that is possible entirely.
Um, uh, I don't know how much of that part I would agree to, because I'll give you one example. So if you study Greek mythology, na, Greek mythology has a lot of stories which you can, study through Homer, you can study through Sophocles, and all of this, literature that they live their life by. This is
Hmm.
their religion, right? Zeus is their god, Aphrodite is a goddess. So I think, and if you read up on these stories, because they're eventually stories, right? You will also get to know that their moral structure is very, very distant from our moral structure, right? Because they have a lot of illicit relationships, they have a lot of adultery, they have a lot of relationships not going the way they would want it to, and these are gods, right? These are gods that people worship. Zeus is a god, and Zeus has done some massive fuckery in his life. So when you read up on these things, you will also understand that even if you have a god who's not, वो उस पथ पर नहीं चल रहा है जो सही पथ है, जो कि उसने खुद प्रोक्लेम किया है कि यही सही पथ है, इसी पर चलना है, राइट? So their moral structure and our moral structure is very different in the sense of their values, their traditions, their culture. But अगर हम उसी जगह पर महाभारत को उठाकर देखेंगे, राइट? महाभारत एज ए टेक्स्ट, नाउ दिस ऑल्सो इज वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग कि महाभारत को घर में रखा नहीं जाता है, सिर्फ रामायण को और गीता को रखा जाता है, क्योंकि ऐसा माना जाता है कि महाभारत घर में रखोगे तो लड़ाइयां हो जाएंगी. This is also a myth, but it's an
Yeah.
interesting myth. It tells us so much about people's beliefs and the fact that they are wanting to believe in everything despite the fact that it's a myth. ठीक है? So Mahabharat mein, there's this one character, Draupadi, who's a lady, right? And women folk are not supposed to, have their relationships built like in multiple phenomena. And
Yeah,
we have
right. Yeah.
Draupadi, who's right in the center of the story, who all these men are fighting for, और वो भाई हैं, और किसी का पर्सपेक्टिव ये है कि औरत के पीछे मर्द लड़ाइयाँ करने लग जाते हैं. That's a very basic boiled down perspective of any lay, Indian. And then we have people saying that, you know, the person who wrote Mahabharat, right, was intelligent enough to create a character such as this, a lady such as this, right, who's so bold in her endeavor, who's so bold that she is on her period and she walks with that kind of blood in the middle of the sabha, and she says that I am not willing to accept whatever you guys are doing because I'm not something to be pawned, right? Which is a feminist act in its own, on its own, right? So we have it way, way, way back, and we're not willing to latch on to that. We're willing to latch on to the fact that एक औरत की वजह से मर्दों में लड़ाई हो जाती है. We're not willing to latch on to the better part of it, right? So which is why stories are very subjective. वही
Hmm.
एग्जैक्टली कि भाई किसी को ओम शांति ओम बहुत पसंद हो सकती है, किसी को ओम शांति ओम बिल्कुल पसंद नहीं हो सकती है. मुझे पहले बिल्कुल पसंद नहीं थी, मुझे अब बहुत पसंद है क्योंकि मुझे मजा आता है उसको देखने में, right? So yes, these are stories that we need to build a moral structure. But 10,000 years down the line, if Hinduism, for say, is replaced by, I don't know, Bollywood, maybe, or any religion is replaced by Bollywood, and then Shahrukh becomes the god of all these deities, and Deepika becomes a Aphrodite, then who knows
Yeah,
what will
yeah,
happen,
yeah.
what the moral structure will be.
Yeah, that's true. See, I don't know. Like you talked about this aspect, ki, maybe looking at the better aspects of the thing. That I think
Hmm.
it comes down to interpretation. Na? Like for
Yeah, yeah,
example, that's your take on it, and maybe that's because of your feminist reading and those sorts of things. Maybe someone's coming from a conservative bent, though. Like who are we to say?
yeah,
And that is, um, and that is what sort of frustrates me. Jab, let's say people in the reactionary right, let's say in India as well, try to have affirmative claims on this is how things should be, or or any part of the world really where orthodoxy then comes in and doesn't allow for let's say nuanced discussions to take place. So I
yeah.
think that's a trap that any religion has to guard against in some sense. um, I wanted to get into your writing process as well, like sort of understanding what your process is, because many writers have different ways of going about it. I think viewers would be interested, and people watching back as well later on. Is there a particular way that you have in terms of a process for writing that you'd like to share?
Depends on what I'm writing. If I'm writing a script, then the process is going to be different. If I'm writing poetry, if I'm writing for a live performance that I have to do, then the process is completely different. So it depends. If I'm writing a podcast script, then the process is completely different. So it depends on what I'm writing.
Yeah, that was sort of the follow up. Like, as I said as well, that you're in so many sort of different mediums. So, how does it differ? Maybe we can start off with, like, we can go through each of them, I guess. So, script writing, like, what does that entail? And, like, yeah, what's your process there?
There's no process per se when it comes to scripts, because screenplays are something that get written and rewritten 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, hundreds of times, right? So you have drafts coming out every 2 months, or every month, every 6 months. So that is a very, very long and a very, very tedious process. So for that process, you have to have no process, because you might as well want to write down at 2 a.m. also to continue that script, and then the next day you might not feel कि भाई मेरा मन नहीं है लिखने का तो मैं नहीं लिखती हूँ उसको, let me just pass it on. So there's no process per se to that. If it comes to poetry, yes, poetry does have a process, because it functions on the basic premise of you wanting to explore more and more ideas, right? You wanting to latch on to what you've read before this, the ideas that have existed before this, and then because your world is changing, because maybe the project that you're working on is something that is based in the current times, and hence you want to sort of experiment with that piece, so you have to latch on to the traditional while also being contemporary to what you're writing, while also having that kind of language which is traditional and contemporary both at the same time, right? So my process of writing poetry per se is that कि मैं अक्सर रात को लिखती हूँ, मैं दिन के वक्त कभी भी नहीं लिखती हूँ। वो इसलिए क्योंकि दिन में बहुत आवाज़ें होती हैं, शोर-शराबा होता है, एंड दिस इज़ वन थिंग दैट आई थिंक एवरी आर्टिस्ट पर से वुड एग्री टू कि because it's a voice that comes from inside of you, you
Mm-hmm.
need to have absolute clarity and absolute silence, at least in the external space, for you to be able to वो कि वो शीशे से टकरा कर एटलीस्ट सुनाई तो देना आपको, वरना आपको कुछ सुनाई नहीं देगा, बिकॉज वी आर सो बिजी इन, एंड दिस माइट साउंड वेरी आई डोंट नो वेरी क्लीशे maybe, but this is actually how it happens, क्योंकि जब because you're a vessel, you're not something who is writing this on your own, you're a vessel, right? It's coming from somewhere, it's just getting translated through you, and then you write it on paper. So you need to have silence for that. So that's the process. I write at night. There is also one very silly thing that I do, that I always light up a diffuser. This is a very recent thing that I've started to experiment with, because I do, want to smell it's मेरे पापा मुझे बोलते हैं कि तुम तो माहौल बना के अपना सारा लिखाई का काम करती हो. So I do believe in that माहौल also. So that is that. And when it comes to podcast scripting, पॉडकास्ट एज अ मीडियम को हमने थोड़ा सा मिस इंटरप्रेट कर लिया है, क्योंकि पॉडकास्ट इज इंटरनेट रेडियो, एंड यू हैव टू बी वेरी स्पॉन्टेनियस इन दैट. सो यू डोंट हैव टू हैव अ स्क्रिप्ट पर से कि भाई पढ़ पढ़ के आप बोल रहे हो, बट हाँ बुलेट पॉइंट्स आप लिख सकते हो, सो दैट यू डोंट, a person like me can just speak and speak and speak for 3 hours at length, but I don't want my podcast to be a 3 hour. So I do scribble out the bullet points. Now it's different for Sukhan and Nagma, because Nagma is 2 episodes every month. So I have to dedicatedly, sit with one song, try to interpret it through my perspective, go in my memory, down my memory lane, and understand कि भाई जब मैंने ये पहली बार गाना सुना था तो मुझे कैसा महसूस हुआ था. Then looking for people who would want to talk about that song. So that's a very, very long process. Nagma has a very long process. सुखन नॉट दैट मच, बिकॉज सुखन में मैं सच में अपने आप से बात करती हूँ, जब मैं माइक अपने सामने रख लेती हूँ तो लोगों को पसंद आ जाती है, वो तो एक बहुत it's a grace that people like what I say, and what I think and how I understand things. So that is a grace. I mean, this is the process. There's no elaborate process. I mean, we're not Wordsworth and no
so,
Ghalib that
so
we need to have a process to it.
so when it comes to poetry, so even I sort of dabble into it. Like I'm an amateur writer when it comes to poetry. So I think in some sense, many people when they talk about structure, they find it really like conflicting. But I think when you have a structure in place, it actually aids creativity. And what I'm talking about that is ki, for example, you have these routines in place. Ki you like writing it in the evenings and at night, or you like putting something on that gives a particular smell out, and that actually has some sort of neurological basis to it. Ki then your
Hmm.
brain knows ki acha, this is your
Yeah.
writing time. If that makes sense. But more than that as well, when it comes to the more technicalities of writing, I think. Like these writers, one of my favorite poets, and he's not that well known. His name is Basil Bunting, and he talked a lot about these things called like the meters. So many people obviously have that when they're doing songwriting, but also I think it plays a role in poetry as well when you use different meters, and how that sort of makes you think in a manner. Because when you are confining yourself to these meters, it's really fascinating to think, but you almost think in a different manner. So if you use
Yeah.
the iambic pentameter, there is a certain manner which you will end up writing, and if you use some other, maybe a free verse, then there's a certain manner where your poetry will come out. So does that play a role as well, ki like when you're sort of technically sitting down to write, is there some sort of structure you prefer, be it free verse, be it a certain meter?
I think I totally agree to that because this I've been feeling for the past few years. Because I used to teach poetry to anybody who wants to understand Urdu poetry per se, Urdu and Hindi poetry, and because हिंदी पोएट्री में तो फ्री वर्स बहुत चलता है, लेकिन उर्दू शायरी में बिल्कुल भी नहीं चलता है, क्योंकि उर्दू
Mm.
शायरी के जो दो पिलर्स होते हैं, एक होता है गजल, एक होता है नज्म, राइट? नज्म में फ्री वर्स आता है जिसे आजाद नज्म बोलते हैं, लेकिन नज्म में भी अपना एक मीटर होता है, क्योंकि इवेंचुअली poetry and music always go together, right? So anything which is good poetry will always translate to good music also. So क्योंकि म्यूजिक के राग होते हैं, उसमें
Mhm.
डो रे मी फा सोला टी डो होता है, तो जब आप कुछ भी लिखते हैं तो वो उसमें फिट बैठना चाहिए, राइट? सो इट्स अ साचा, इट्स अ व्हाट यू कॉल साचा, इट्स लाइक अ बॉक्स in which you have
Huh.
to fit that thing.
Yeah.
uh, I used to only write ghazals, right? Because I spent quite some time understanding the structure of a ghazal and then studying some very good ghazals and then studying Jagjit ji and Chitra ji's work and a lot of these Nusrat Saab. So then after a point, na, it just started suffocating me. क्योंकि बहुत ज्यादा जब आप गल्प डाउन कर लेते हो, then it only leads to a vomit, right? And that happens with the content that you consume also, because this is all eventually content, right? And when someone who's practiced something for an entire lifetime, you're listening to that person on loop for hours, right? And you're wanting, and एक अंदर से आवाज आ रही है कि यार मुझे ऐसा लिखना है, यार मुझे ऐसा लिखना है, यार मुझे ऐसा लिखना है. So that's a very unwanted pressure also that you put on yourself, and you have no control over it. It's like anxiety, you have no control over it, right? And then eventually it does begin to suffocate you, because your thinking does not follow a structure.
Mm.
क्योंकि सोचने में आजादी प्रिंसिपल होता है, पाबंदी प्रिंसिपल नहीं होता. यू कैन थिंक एनीथिंग एंड एवरीथिंग एंड देन यू कैन गिव लैंग्वेज टू इट, राइट? तो मेरे साथ ये होना शुरू किया, और फिर उसके बाद मैंने क्या किया, मैंने गजल लिखनी बंद कर दी, छोड़ दी उसके बाद, कि मैं नहीं लिखूंगी इसको, एटलीस्ट अंटिल द टाइम दैट आई थिंक दैट आई कैन मेक लव टू दिस अगेन. Meanwhile, what I did explore about myself was that नज्म ऑल्सो, लाइक जिसे हिंदी में कविता बोलते हैं, वो भी जिस तरीके से आ रही थी, हो सकता है वो मेरी म्यूजिक में फॉर्मल एजुकेशन हो या कुछ भी हो सकता है, क्योंकि इवेंचुअली हम सब म्यूजिक समझ सकते हैं, डिस्पाइट द फैक्ट दैट मेनी ऑफ अस वुड नॉट बी एबल टू सिंग इन अ गुड मैनर, बट वी डू लिसन टू म्यूजिक एंड वी डू एंजॉय इट इन अ सिमिलर मैनर. इंसान जो होता है, अ ह्यूमन बीइंग इज अ म्यूजिकल बीइंग, राइट? बिकॉज वी अंडरस्टैंड, ऑल ऑफ अस अंडरस्टैंड म्यूजिक. So after a point of time, I realized that whatever was coming to me was actually coming in meter only,
Mm.
but not in the meter that a ghazal requires, but in the meter that a kavita or a nazm requires. Like for example, I'll give you an example. So I had a live mehfil to do the other day, and I had written nothing, and I had to perform the next day. I was like कि भाई audience आएगी, वो मुझे ठेंगा दिखा के जाएगी, तो तुम्हें कुछ भी नहीं आता है, तुम कुछ सुनाती नहीं हो. Uh, so I sat down to write at 1 a.m. I had a show the next day 5 p.m. and I just sat down in half an hour. I was like, मैं बस ऐसे बैठी हुई थी. मैं कहा यार नहीं हो पाएगा आज रात को, तो हो ही जाती हूँ. इससे अच्छा तो एटलीस्ट कल मेरे डार्क सर्कल्स तो नहीं दिखेंगे. So then, right when I was about to give up, something came to me, and then I just started writing it, scribbling it down. कि भाई चंदा तेरी प्रीत के छल में मैंने रात गुजारी है, दिल को दिलासे देते देते वक्त की करी सवारी है. Now this is very abstract. right? Maybe some days I don't understand what I write also. You know, my father keeps complaining about this कि मुझे समझ नहीं आता कि तू लिखती क्या है. It is like a completely different domain कि भाई तुम्हें अगर समझ नहीं आ रहा तो फिर मतलब मैं नहीं अच्छा लिख रही हूँ, इसका मतलब है. But I think that's where anything beautiful, na, you'll never be able to understand it in the first go. You'll have to
Hmm.
spend hours and hours and hours listening to it, trying to understand it, and then uski parte khulni shuru hoti hai. This is with music. This is with any other thing.
Yeah.
So, so for me as an individual, it comes very naturally to me. I don't know what that process is. I don't know how that comes to me, but it does come. And this is also what I want to say. It comes to me once a year or twice a year only. So which is why when people tell me, "अरे कुछ please नया सुनाइए ना," नहीं सुना पाऊंगी. आपको पुराना सुनना है तो आप प्लीज सुन लीजिए. अगर आपको वो पसंद है मैं अब आपको सुना देती हूँ. लेकिन अगर वही लोग मुझे बोले कि अभी बैठ के लिखो, तो शायद मैं लिख भी दूँ, क्योंकि वो एक नेचुरल प्रोसेस होता है जो कि आपके से उतर जाता है. सो या आई थिंक इतना ही मैं डिस्क्लोज करना चाहूंगी
But
आज.
नहीं, फेयर इनफ, फेयर इनफ. तो आपने एक बात कही थी लाइक स्ट्रक्चर की, दैट इट समटाइम्स इट कैन गेट सफोकेटिंग. तो
वेरी.
I've heard poets and like other creative professionals talk about this ki the manner is कि you have to keep practicing in that structure, and then
या
if you get skilled at it, only then आप सोच सकते हो कि अच्छा ठीक है, I'm skilled enough, so maybe I can deviate from the structure a little bit, and it'll still fit the creative essence of what I'm trying to put out.
या
Like even if you are writing iambic pentameter, you can sort of play around with the structure, and only then, like there's this writer, he's a blogger, pretty much, his name is Curtis Yarvin. So he says that to write good poetry, you have to risk being cringe but not be cringe, basically. So
यस.
so and it's that, and he says that it's that fine balance that you have to almost find कि अच्छा आप लिख रहे हो, but आपको लग रहा है कि cringe हो सकता है, but आपको वो risk करना पड़ेगा, वरना you won't, like the good poetry wouldn't come out in some sense.
या
So yeah, that's also something when you talked about this musical side of thing. I genuinely believe this, that we were talking about these mythological texts previously, and any sort of great work of literature or art for that matter. I think if it's a text based thing, it has to sink to you almost, if it has to
या
stick over a
या
period of time. So when you
यस.
read like these stories, like I think these were like poems, like 800 pages long poems, like the
Yes,
Mahabharata and the Ramayana.
yes,
But if you read
yes,
any verse of it, it's like it's almost singing to you. And I think
yes,
in Sanskrit there is a word to it, it's called rasa, like
जी,
something
जी,
that sort of sticks to you, so that even though there is, let's say, textual meaning to the words itself, even if you sort of don't understand the meaning of it, and if you simply read it, or if it's sung aloud, read aloud, there is this rhythmicity to it which sort of brings people along, and sort of creates something that is beyond the text in some sense. I don't know if I'm sounding preachy or whatever, but
No, no,
like
absolutely. I
do you
agree
sort
to
of
every word that
yeah,
you
yeah.
said. I'll tell you why. So I was taking this workshop, I think last year, maybe last to last year, and there is a structure that I follow to the workshop because I make people acquainted with the language first, and then I get into the semantics of it, history of it, then to the structure of a ghazal, then to the structure of a nazm,
Mhm.
then going on to all of that. So then when I was exactly, I have conversations about what people think about art, if they think that art is something that is gifted, or if it is something that can be cultivated over a period of time, right? And people have different perspectives over it. And then someone reached out to me and said that वृंदा, क्या आप जानती हैं कि हमारी धड़कन का अपना एक म्यूजिक होता है. And I was sitting there and I was like, yeah, she's right. That is why we are musical beings, because heartbeat is actually our heart beating,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And beat is something which is so preliminary to music and poetry, right? So yes, that is why we connect. मतलब ये मेरे साथ मेरी फैमिली में हुआ है कि कितने सारे लोग जिनके रिलीजियस ओपिनियंस, जिनके पॉलिटिकल ओपिनियंस एक दूसरे के साथ अलाइन नहीं होते, वो दोनों रात को 11 बजे के बाद बैठकर नुसरत साहब को सुनते हैं, डिस्पाइट द फैक्ट दैट दे नो दैट अगली सुबह वो लोग लड़ेंगे मोदी जी पर या किसी भी और के स्टिंग पर. But at that time, Nusrat Saab is just Nusrat Saab. He's not a Muslim. He's not someone who belongs to Pakistan. He's not, he's an artist.
Yeah, yeah,
He's the person who brings people together, and he's the person who brings people together because his music brings people together, because his spirituality, his dedication to that kind of music brings people together, despite the fact that all of his qawwalis are in Urdu,
yeah.
and Urdu is a roadblock in our country.
Yeah, it's so fascinating though, and
That's
that's
the
why.
beauty about people, क्योंकि हम लोग जो है ना, हमें ये पता है कि हम juxtapositions में exist कर रहे हैं,
Hmm.
और हमें पता है और हम उसके accepting हैं.
Hmm.
यही खूबसूरती है इस बात की,
Yeah.
और यही नहीं खोना है हमको.
Yeah, that's no, I totally agree. I agree so much with this. But it's so that's why when you were talking about key, like, if can we stand outside, let's say, these stories and actually think for ourselves in an objective manner, in a manner that can sort of bring us to some sort of moral foundation. And that's why I think it's really difficult, because if you look at the most what's it called, objective of regimes as well, like most rational of regimes in the
Hmm.
Soviet Union as well, Stalin, you could say he's like the most he's the most subjective people who try to create something only based on like facts, logic, those kind of things. But he said that no one's going to touch poetry, and no one's going to touch like music, because he was so sort of enamored by it. So I think there is some sort of place ki, like, art in some sense puts us away, I don't know, speaks to the transcendent if one believes in it or not, and sort of puts us ki, theek hai, there is something more than us, and maybe in our ability to create these sorts of things, which in some sense become larger than life, like these stories you were talking about, these films, whatever.
Yeah,
That is what sort of speaks ki, acha, there is something that is to be aspired towards, or some sort of ideal that everyone sort of tries to, whatever, to their best of their ability, match up
yeah,
to.
yeah. Because see, our the premise of our life is poetry.
Hmm.
Why? Because हम सब जब पैदा होते हैं, ये जो पूरी जिंदगी का एक साइकिल होता है, राइट, वट एवर लाइफ वी लिव, बी इट 40 years, 80 years, 100 years, 20 years, eventually we do come around to wanting to understand religion, and then making that journey from understanding religion to understanding spirituality, and then becoming a spiritual person, राइट, बिकॉज रिलीजन, जब जिस दिन आपको पता चल गया कि धर्म का मतलब धर्म नहीं है, धर्म का मतलब सच्चाई है, धर्म का मतलब ट्रूथफुलनेस है, राइचियसनेस है, राइट, उस दिन आप सारे धर्मों को पीछे छोड़ देंगे, बिकॉज दोज आर गोइंग टू बी रिडंडेंट फॉर यू, and then you will just believe in wherever you see belief, right? This I realized after many years of observing people, कि जब मैं किसी को गाली दे रही हूँ कि यार तू किसी मुसलमान को गाली इसलिए दे रहा है क्योंकि वो मुसलमान है, राइट, नॉट अंडरस्टैंडिंग दैट वो शायद तुझे वापस गाली देगा क्योंकि तू हिंदू है, और तू उसको बना रहा है, वो तू
हाँ.
उसको किक कर रहा है उसको वो करने के लिए. एंड देन आई रियलाइज्ड ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम दैट हर इंसान को अपने बिलीफ सिस्टम रखने का हक है, whatever that belief system is, whatever he believes in Ram, he believes in Krishna, he believes in Jesus, whatever that entity is, he wants that person, not using he, that person wants to believe in, let them believe in that, because that's a journey that they're making for themselves.
Yeah.
Maybe 40 years down the line they will realize that जय श्री राम करना शायद इसका मतलब ही नहीं था, हो सकता है मैं स्पिरिचुअल इंसान पहले बन सकता था इससे, राइट. एंड दैट इज व्हाई आई आल्सो मोस्ट एसोसिएट टू सिखिज्म एज अ रिलीजन, क्योंकि वहां पर लोगों को पता है कि वाहिगुरु हमारे भगवान नहीं है, वाहिगुरु एक कवि थे जिन्होंने आपको एक पाथ दिखाया था आगे बढ़ने का, right? And that is what any poetry makes you do. It gives you experiences of people who've come before you, for you to understand and not make those mistakes. Make your own mistakes. Don't make those mistakes that these people made, because you're better than that, right? You're better to make a human being's filaments better with generations to come, right? And I read this one quote one day, which is I don't know if it's from the Gurbani, but this is of course from the Sikh religion, कि भाई अव्वल अल्लाह नूर उपाया कुदरत के सब बंदे, एक नूर से सभी हैं उपजे, कौन कौन भले कौन मंदे, right? अब ये this is, even if
Could
you
you
don't
entangle
understand,
that? Yeah,
yeah, I'll
in
do
some
that.
sense.
Yeah. So if you listen to it for the first time, अव्वल अल्लाह नूर पाया कुदरत के सब बंदे, एक नूर से सभी हैं उपजे, कौन भले कौन मंदे. Now you might not be able to understand it, but you will know that, wow,
Yeah.
क्या राइमिंग है इसकी और क्या मीटर है इसका, और जब फिर तुम समझोगे फिर तुम्हें समझ आएगा कि इसका मैसेज क्या है, राइट? अव्वल अल्लाह यानी कि सिखिज्म में फिल्में भी जो बनी है सिखिज्म पर, उसमें भी जो वाहेगुरु जी हैं, राइट, जो वाहेगुरु जी हैं उनको सिर्फ एक नूर से रिप्रेजेंट कर सकते हो आप। यू कैन नॉट गिव दैट पर्सन अ फिगर, क्योंकि उनमें वो प्रोहिबिटेड है। क्योंकि
Mm.
वाहेगुरु जी ने खुद बोला था कि मुझे भगवान मत बनाना, मुझे सिर्फ एक नूर की तरह देखना है जो शायद तुम्हें रोशनी दिखाकर आगे लेके जा रहा है, राइट? And this is exactly what Buddha also said later. सो अव्वल अल्लाह यानी कि वो अल्लाह जो भी है, वो राम है, वो अल्लाह है, वो जीसस है, जिसमें भी आप मानते हैं, तो वो सबसे ऊपर है। अव्वल अव्वल यानी कि फर्स्ट डिवीजन, ठीक है? अव्वल अल्लाह नूर उपाया, उसने एक नूर बनाया, एक रास्ता बनाया, एक रोशनी बनाई, और वो रोशनी, लाइट, यू नो दैट डिस्टेंस फ्रॉम डार्कनेस टू लाइट, लाइट एट द एंड ऑफ द टनल, that light is very important in our lives because it helps us move forward in life, right? It shows us the path. तो अव्वल अल्लाह नूर उपाया, उसने रोशनी बनाई, कुदरत के सब बंदे, वो जब रोशनी आई तो उस रोशनी ने जब सबको रोशन किया, तो हमने देखा कि हम सब कुदरत के बंदे हैं। वी आर ऑल मेड ऑफ नेचर, बिकॉज वी आर मेड ऑफ 5 elements: फायर, वाटर, स्काई, अर्थ. व्हाट्स द फिफ्थ एलिमेंट?
Mhm.
यू
I
टेल
don't
मी.
know.
Okay, so fire, water, earth, sky, and air, right?
Air.
These
Okay.
are
Yeah.
five,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
five elements that our body is made of. That is why when cremation happens, we are turned to ash, right? Or when we get buried, we are also turned to manure. सो अवल अल्लाह नूर उपाया, कुदरत के सब बंदे एक नूर से सभी हैं उपजे, उसी नूर से हम सब बने हैं। कौन भले कौन मंदे, कौन भले कौन मंदे माने कि रिलीजन के हिसाब से आप हायरार्की कर लो, आप क्लास के हिसाब से हायरार्की कर लो। हिंदुइज्म में क्षत्रिय, वैश्य, शूद्र, ये सब बाइफिकेशंस होती हैं, हायरार्कीज होती हैं। सो इवेंचुअली you will come around to seeing everybody equal because you will understand that तुमने अपनी पूरी जिंदगी इनको अलग अलग करने में बिता दी, जबकि ये सब एक ही थे,
Mhm.
right? So that's the message of this verse, and it stuck around with me, and then I started putting this verse into my life. And it's funny how you put poetry into your life and you start to live your life on that one verse that you liked many years ago. So yeah, that's what I'm saying, that we live our life on poetry because anything, poetry, music, we like, we keep repeating it in our conscience, and that it becomes imprinted onto us for a lifetime. और कभी कभी हम वो भूल सकते हैं, कभी कभी हम याद भी रख सकते हैं उस चीज को, बट वो हमारी लाइफ को डिफाइन करता है। जब हम ऐसा, मैंने बहुत इंटरव्यूज देखे हैं, बहुत लोगों से बात भी की है, मेनी पीपल से दैट व्हेन यू ऑन योर डेथ बेड एंड व्हेन यू आर लिविंग योर लास्ट मोमेंट्स, you do realize the mistakes that you did and not the good things that you did, right? क्योंकि उस वक्त आपको याद, this is very metaphorical and this is very illusionary and all of that, but when you're in pain you do realize the pain that you gave to others at some point of time. शायद मैंने उसके साथ ये ना किया होता तो हो सकता है मेरे साथ ये ना हो रहा होता आज. Now that can be true and false for different situations and different people, but that's the moral compass that we're also talking about here. कि moral compass किन चीजों से बनता है? एक ही चीज से बनता है कि क्या सही और गलत में हम फर्क करने के काबिल हैं, और अगर काबिल हैं तो हमें उसमें फर्क हमेशा करना चाहिए. So sorry, this was very long.
नहीं नहीं, I was just taking everything in because I resonate so much. जो
Yeah.
आपने there's so much that is there over there. But when you talked about this aspect कि every one of us has like these poems, these verses that we come back to. Um,
Mhm.
what was my question here? Like it was like how do you think that for example if there are differences that people think within their moral framework, if as you pointed out, um, uh, perhaps someone is more orthodox and doesn't want to look at it in that manner and wants to only go by what was written, jo Gita mein likha tha, they'll take it as the word, or what's written in the Quran they'll take it as literally what is it. So how do you think then those barriers can be bridged? Is it simply on like common is it simply through love, you showing them the way ki acha, but why do you think aisa hai, matlab how can it be that there can be distinctions which can be made on caste or simply by the manner you're where you were born or something of that sort? Like how do you think those bridges can be sort of yeah, those bridges can be like, yeah,
Yeah.
because that's something we're facing in our country but all over the world as well, where people sort of in some sense want that want everyone to be like them, or B, following their way of looking at the world? How do you
Yeah.
think that bridge can be?
I think for you to contribute to, because you're not, you know, that one figure who everybody would listen to, like you're not the Pope. So I think the one thing that you can always and always
Even the
do,
Pope is quite progressive these days. So
yeah, 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 yeah.
I don't know
Uh,
if you've been following, but yeah.
yeah, I have been following, and which is why I agree to that. But which is why I gave in this reference also. Ki bhai, I think the one thing that you must begin with, right? Because it's a long, long journey that you have to make. That is that you have to keep doing your work,
Hmm.
what speaks to you, what is your truth. And it is not your direct responsibility to convert that person.
Yeah.
Because अगर आप अपने ऊपर वो जिम्मेदारी लेंगे तो आपकी सारी एनर्जी शायद उसको कन्वर्ट करने में वो चली जाए, जबकि आपको अपना पाथ फॉलो करना चाहिए. एंड बिकॉज दैट पर्सन विल जॉइन इवेंचुअली योर काफिला, योर ग्रुप ऑफ पीपल, इफ एंड at whatever point in life that person thinks that हाँ यार शायद ये पिछले 10 साल से जो बोल रहा है ये सही बोल रहा है. So you have no control over that. You have no control over destiny. You have no control over luck. You have no control over people's opinions, because these three things can change at any given point of time. And you are not the one who's changing it. It's something else, maybe their fate, their free will, anything that can be changing them, their perspective towards life or whatever. So I think कि आप जो कर सकते हैं वो यही कर सकते हैं कि आप अपना काम करते रहो. अगर आपको ये आप मानते हो कि प्यार इस सब फसाद का हल है, तो आप उस जर्नी पे जाओ ना. आप हो सकता है अकेले जाओगे, लेकिन आपके साथ लोग जुड़ेंगे. जब लोग जुड़ेंगे तो फिर आपका मैसेज जो है एग्जैक्टली व्हाट हैपेंड इन सिखिज्म, राइट? जो वाहिगुरु जी हैं. So if you know the history, I'll recommend one film to you if you want to watch it. It's called what is it called? It's an A.R. Rahman film. I'll probably पता नहीं, मुझे अभी याद नहीं आ रहा, तो मैं याद करके बताऊंगी. So it basically shows Sikhism कैसे बना था, right?
Hmm.
So it's basically made from Hinduism and Islam, both of these religions coming together, which is why Punjabi is derived half from Hindi, half from Urdu,
Yeah.
right? And if you believe in love, right? For example, I 3 years ago realized that अगर मैं लोगों से लड़ती रहूंगी और उनको अपने ओपिनियंस समझने का एक्सपेक्ट करती रहूंगी, तो शायद मैं उस वक्त को भी खो दूंगी जो शायद मैं अपने रास्ते पर चलकर they will come around eventually with me, than me wasting my energy with them, arguing with them. Let me just do my work, let me just pursue poetry, and they will come around. And
Yeah.
it's been 3-4 years and they have come around, because they have realized the kind of passion and the kind of jazba and the kind of message of love that I propagate in all that I do, right? And eventually you do realize that love is everything. It's everything. And love not in the romantic sense of it, love as in love is care. If you think that you're human, you know that you will care for anything, care for, I don't, a riot that's happening maybe, I don't know, 100 kilometers away from you, care for a dog, care for a puppy, care for your lover, care for a dying man, and you wanting to give that person the best moments of his life, the last best moments of. So care can be anything यार. मतलब अगर आप किसी चीज को प्यार करते हैं तो आप उसके बारे में सोचेंगे, उसको समझेंगे, and that is how people come around. That is
Hmm.
how every religion's base is love and love only. फिर भी इतने फसाद होते हैं, फिर भी इतनी लड़ाइयाँ होती हैं. And that
I,
is when poetry and music comes into the picture.
for sure. Like as Krishna says in the Gita as well, right? Just do your work and not think about the fruits of your
Don't
labor.
exactly
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
think
yeah.
about the fruit of your labor, but that's also subjective, क्योंकि लोग उसको बहुत मिसइंटरप्रेट करते हैं और उसको वही छोड़ देते हैं कि भाई अच्छा
Uh,
कर्म करना है, अच्छा फल की इच्छा नहीं करनी है. अरे भाई कर्म करना है, उसमें भी तो डिसीजन लेना है ना कि सही करना
hmm.
है या गलत करना है. That's also a decision that you have to make in order to
Yeah.
reap fruit out of that.
Yeah, I
So
mean, the Gita is very controversial in many ways because
yes,
essentially what Krishna is saying is to kill his cousins only, if
yeah,
you sort of boil it down to the basics. I think. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, we were talking. So one of your other endeavors is podcasting, and sort of the reason why I started off a podcast was this aspect of just having conversations with whoever I'm interested in, and this
mhm,
aspect of free speech, which in
mhm,
some sense is becoming targeted, which I think which is in my estimation, the most fundamental of our rights. And it's
Hmm.
not just another right, it's the right that keeps all other rights in place, in my
Hmm.
estimation.
Hmm.
And there's this intellectual, his name is Sam Harris. He says that the only way societies make progress is through intellectual conversation. And if there is, agar usme hi ek badha ban ja rahi hai that society is putting on it, then I think there is trouble. Was that I understand that you have two different podcasts and they look at different aspects and different themes as such, but is there any particular point that you're trying to achieve, or broadly, what is it that you're trying to achieve?
Sorry, I missed out on a question. Your voice
Oh,
just broke in the middle.
oh, sorry. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, I mean, so I was talking about this aspect of free speech and the prevalence it plays in
Mhm.
society.
Mhm.
And I also wanted to ask you, because you have a podcast yourself. So
Mhm.
was that one of the core premises on why you wanted to start off your podcast, or yeah?
See, my core purpose of starting a podcast was to fight anxiety. Point number one. The second thing that I got around to understand of me wanting to speak to myself, because podcasting back then, I started in 2018 or 19. It was not in vogue, at least in India,
Oh yeah,
right?
I don't think it still
And
is in some sense,
it
but
still is. I mean, अब तो यार हर किसी का podcast है, which is good also because people
yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
wanting to, talk to themselves, which is good. So my purpose of starting it was that first people wanted to listen to me more. लेकिन लिसन टू मी मोर में मैं अपने आप को एक पेडेस्टल पे रख के ये नहीं सोचना चाहती थी वृंदा वैद रॉक्स, ये नहीं सोचना चाहती थी मैं. सो माय प्राइमरी एम ऑफ स्टार्टिंग द पॉडकास्ट वाज टू I wanted to do something in the audio industry, but I didn't want to join radio, right? Because people came up to me, एक बार offer भी आया कि आप कर लो join radio अगर आप आवाज की industry में आना चाहते हो तो. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something on the internet, which is why I started a podcast. Secondly, I wanted to listen to myself. बिकॉज़ उस वक़्त मुझे बहुत कम ऐसे मौके मिलते थे जब मैं खुद से बात कर पाती थी. और एंड दैट्स द ट्रेजेडी ऑफ आवर जनरेशन दैट वी टॉक टू एवरीबॉडी एल्स through emojis, through text, through conversations, but we don't talk to ourselves because that's not in vogue. That's not something that we understand. Uh, there have been instances where I've been speaking to myself in front of the mirror, and then someone comes in, and that person thinks that she's mad. Maybe what is she talking to herself? Why is she talking to herself in front of the mirror? But this has always been my coping mechanism. That when I don't understand things, I just begin to ramble about it. For me to try and understand कि मैं क्या सोच रही हूँ, कि वो मेरे जब मुंह से निकल रहा है तो वो किस तरीके से निकल रहा है. And I was very fascinated with language, with words. I still am very fascinated with words. कि भाई किस तरीके से किसके मुंह से किस तरीके से निकलता है, क्या इमोशन इन्वॉल्व होता है उसके साथ. So I wanted to build up on my vocabulary also. I wanted to build up on my pronunciation also. So that is also why I started a podcast. But majorly मुझे खुद से बात करना पसंद था, इसलिए मैंने शुरू किया था वो. And खुद से बात करना पसंद था, तो that is a part of free speech also. So yes, that boiled
No,
down.
but that's something that most people wouldn't do. That people who have a podcast as well, that's something that they sort of refrain from. Ki when they're editing or whenever they're doing something, they're like, "Oh, that's the worst bit of my thing. Ki I have to listen to my own voice." Something. So that does come
Yeah.
into it. But yeah, I mean, I guess, but it doesn't only have to be through the medium of like voicing it out, right? Like if one simply sits with themselves, then they can
Yeah.
also come to understanding themselves to a better extent than voicing it out. Maybe that's just your way of doing it, I guess.
I mean, we do journal, right? Why is there a
Huh.
whole revolution of journaling recently? It started in 2020 after the lockdown. It
I
started
didn't know
because we
there's a
wanted.
revolution.
There's
There
a
is?
complete revolution which has now been commercialized also in India, at least. That's what
Wow.
I can tell. And people have been, making manifestation journals and, this journal and that journal. I
I guess
have
that,
been
but I guess
writing.
that happens every year with New Year's and then those sorts of things, doesn't it?
मैनिफेस्टेशन जर्नल्स तो मैंने हाल ही में देखी हैं कि अब
Okay.
उसको इतना कमर्शियलाइज कर दिया गया है कि जर्नल जर्नल नहीं रही है. उस जर्नल में सिर्फ आप मैनिफेस्टेशंस लिखोगे अपनी.
Acha.
सिर्फ आप अपने गोल्स. जर्नल में तो बंदा कुछ भी लिख सकता है ना.
Huh, huh, huh.
So anyway, that's a completely. I don't want to get into that controversy. Uh, for me, journaling has always been something that I never will read. Maybe 2 years, 3 years down the line, I might read. But it's something that makes me go naked in front of myself. And we are so afraid of being naked, not in front of the other person. We are afraid of being naked in front of our own self, because we don't want to see our vices. We only want to
Hmm.
see our virtues, you know. And in that process, you do tend to have more vices than virtues. So that started because I wanted to go naked in front of myself, and for me to be able to write down what I'm feeling. But I think this also applies to everybody else, because when you think about something now, you often don't understand where your thought is going, and hence you write it down for you to be able to understand and make sense of how will I think about this maybe next week, how will I think about this maybe next year. And that is why we journal. Today, if I look back at a journal which is 2000, which is the year 2018, I will see the difference my life has made and the kind of progress that I have made in my thought, in my language, in my understanding, in my life. So we journal because we want to listen to ourselves, and we must also talk to ourselves because we want to listen to ourselves. That's
Yeah.
what I believe. That's what I think. And initially मुझे भी पसंद नहीं था अपने आप को सुनना, जबकि मैं बोलना बहुत पसंद करती थी, लेकिन एडिटर ऐसा होता था मुझे कि तू क्या बोल रही है यार, ये कौन.
uh,
एंड देन पीपल स्टार्ट रीचिंग आउट टू मी कि यार हम सुनते हैं, प्लीज इसको जारी रखिएगा. एंड देन आई स्टार्टेड लिसनिंग टू माई सेल्फ ऑल्सो. So yeah, if you love listening to yourself, you should have a podcast. That's what I say.
I think adding to that, when people want to speak, say, I think Nietzsche said this back in the day, and he's just so smart that I can't even put it in words. He said that most people want to speak but don't want to be heard.
Yeah.
So you want to have the opportunity to voice whatever, but you don't want it ki acha the other person's actually understanding what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah, because you
Because
just
then
want to be rambling on.
they'll understand your idiosyncrasies then, and whatever waffle you're doing and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But in some sense, I've been told there are many ways of sort of tackling anxiety. But as you said, there are, I think, three ways which most people can sort of implement in their lives, which is relatively straightforward. I guess one is writing. I think that sort of lays it down, because writing, in some sense, is a meta form of thinking. Because when you're thinking, as you said, there are so many thoughts that come to you. But
Hmm.
when you're writing, you're sitting down and distilling them in some fashion to sort of cut it down and actually concisely put it key what is it that you're thinking about, or
Hmm.
what is it that is catching your fancy at that time. The other is exercise, because I genuinely think that when you're lifting weights, when you're doing cardio, those sorts of things, putting some physiological stress on your body, that clearly helps as well. And obviously meditation. So like obviously there are many more things, but these are a few things that most people can implement in their lives. So yeah, I mean, I was listening to that same podcast of yours with Noor Chahal, and something that you guys talked about. I don't know if it was you or Noor who sort of pointed it forward. I think she said that happiness is overrated. I don't know if you remember that part of the
I
conversation.
said it because I truly believe in it.
You do? Okay. Can you sort of yeah, just entangle it for the audience? Like, what do you sort of mean by that?
Uh, I think because we are confused, because we are always trying to understand how we're feeling and how we want to process what we are feeling, we often confuse two things. I mean, we are often confused between two things, right? Uh, the most important thing that we're confused about, that we all want out of our lives, but we don't know how to get it. And that's the process. That is happiness. मतलब सब खुश होना चाहते हैं, कोई दुखी तो होना नहीं चाहता इस दुनिया में, सब खुशी रहना चाहते हैं. And this is also a reality that if there is happiness, then there is going to be sadness also, because sadness नहीं होगी तो happiness की वो TRP value नहीं रहेगी हमारे जीवन की. So I think more than happiness, what we should strive for is satisfaction, is satiety, is contentment. We should, by consuming the right content,
Hmm.
right? Content and content are completely two different things that can define each other also, if you're on the right track of understanding yourself. And happiness is very overrated, because आप हमेशा तो खुश नहीं रहते हो. तो अगर आप हमेशा खुश नहीं रह सकते हो, तो आप अपने दुख को भी उसी मकाम पर रखो ना. Right, you're understanding what I can explain. Okay. So we are happy when we are happy because we are sharing that moment with others, or we're sharing that moment with us. But when we are sad, or when we are in the middle of turmoil, in the middle of some health emergency, or some other breakup, or some other sadness, then we just want to get away with it. हटाओ हटाओ हटाओ, जल्दी 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 इसको खत्म करो. And the most intelligent philosophers have said this, that जितना रस आपको खुशी के उन लम्हों में मिलता है, उससे ज्यादा रस आपको दर्द के उन लम्हों में मिलता है, क्योंकि आपका वो वक्त जो होता है वो जल्दी नहीं गुजरता, because you're in pain at that time, right? So when you're happy, it's just going to be 1 second, and when you're sad, it's going to be a whole year, right? So if we are savoring happiness, then we must also savor sadness. We must also accept that आप कोई फरिश्ते तो हैं नहीं, आप इंसान हैं, आपको सुख मिलेगा तो आपको दुख भी मिलेगा, right? And this is also what people who are having a journey from religion to spirituality understand through their way, कि सुख जो है वो बहुत ओवररेटेड है और दुख जो है वो बहुत अंडररेटेड है. क्योंकि दुख के टाइम पे, आई हैव आल्सो डन एन एपिसोड ऑन दिस, दुख के टाइम पे एवरी नर्व ऑफ योर बॉडी knows what is happening. Sukh ke time pe every nerve of your body doesn't know what is happening, because you're so involved, your mind is so involved with those moments, right, that those pass off in a second, right? और ये जो रस होता है, जो रसा होता है, जो जिससे सारे गमा पाधा निसा बनता है, या जिससे हमारे ह्यूमन इमोशंस बनते हैं, नवरस, उसमें आपको जब आपकी ट्रेनिंग होती है तो आपको सुख जब सिखाया जाता है, उससे डबल टाइम लगता है जब आपको दुख का इमोशन सिखाया जाता है, राइट? क्योंकि जब आप दुखी होते हैं तो आपको पूरी पोटेंशियल अपने अंदर की निकालनी पड़ेगी वो दुख दिखाने के लिए, राइट? विच इज वाई पीपल यूज ग्लिसरीन all the time in films, in cinema, in serials, because they can't cry, because they can't feel that sadness inside of them, right? And they tend to switch over to glycerine. But when they are asked to do a happy scene, they just do it in just jiffy. So I think that happiness is very overrated and sadness is very underrated, and hence if you are sad at any given point, just sit with yourself and savor that sadness. Just
And
sit with
cherish.
yourself and
That's
cherish
a
that sadness.
that's a clip.
Yeah,
Cherish the sadness.
just cherish that sadness, because this is something, this is the 9 months of labor that is going to give you that baby of happiness tomorrow or whenever you want, you will have it eventually. And hence replace your happiness with satisfaction, replace it. Because when you're satisfied in life, that's when you're at the pinnacle of existence. That's when you're happy also. So happiness should be at the lowest rung of your life. और ये हर धर्म सिखाता है कि सुख और दुख में सम रहना सीखो, क्योंकि दुख आएगा तो सुख आएगा और सुख आएगा तो दुख भी आएगा, right? So be neutral. This is also acidic basic में भी ये principle बहुत apply होता है, and acidic basic is all of us.
I think in every sphere, like in all walks of life, as the name of the show
In all
goes.
walks of life.
Yeah. But how difficult do you think that is? Because of course, like everyone sort of passes these things out in a manner, and I'm not simply targeting you, but many people do in society that who do talk about these things. But what are some steps do you think that people can take in possibly finding contentment, and not always chasing that momentary lapse of happiness or joy or whatever it is?
I think it's very subjective. I cannot give you the ABCs
Like
of
most
finding
questions on this
contentment.
podcast, but yeah.
Yeah, I cannot give you ABCs because it's a journey that you're making, na? Because मेरी जिंदगी और आपकी जिंदगी, आपकी दुनिया, मेरी दुनिया बहुत अलग है. Despite the fact that we might live in the same geographical location, and but to find contentment, na, you first have to be very conscious of how you're living your life. And how you're living your life does not involve your lifestyle, does not involve the life choices that you make, because contentment यानी कि जिसे बोलते हैं कि हम उर्दू में बोलते हैं मुतमईन है, हिंदी में बोलते हैं संतुष्ट है. संतुष्टि जो होती है वो एक एलिवेशन ऑफ द माइंड से आती है. एलिवेशन ऑफ द माइंड क्या होता है कि आप अगर कुछ भी एक्सपीरियंस कर रहे हैं, आप किसी को सुन रहे हैं, आप किसी को देख रहे हैं, फिल्म देख रहे हैं, म्यूजिक सुन रहे हैं, उस वक्त आपका हर सेंस जो है ना आपकी बॉडी के अंदर, वो एकदम A1 लेवल पे कंप्लीटली टॉप ऑफ द माइंड होना चाहिए. सो वी हैव 5 सेंसेस, राइट? आईज, नोज, व्हाटएवर यू माइट नो द सेंसेस. और वो जो सेंसरी एक्सपीरियंस होता है वो एक एक्सपीरियंस क्यों बनता है? वो एक्सपीरियंस तब बनता है जब आपकी सारी चीजें जो हैं उसको लैच ऑन कर रही हैं. Your senses are receptive to that thing. And that is the greatest treasure of any artist, because any artist, any good artist is a fabulous observer. राइट, वो बहुत अच्छे से किसी इंसान को, किसी चीज को बहुत ऑब्जर्व करता है, वक्त उसके साथ बिताता है, डिस्पाइट द फैक्ट दैट दैट माइट बी इनएनिमेट आल्सो.
Hmm.
But that's the joy of existence, you know. You can either you can just take a time lapse of a flower blooming, or you can just sit there and see it blooming, and you might not realize कि वो bloom भी कब हो गया, but at least you've sat through the whole process and seen कि भाई उसके
हाँ.
उसकी पंखुड़ियां कैसे खुलती हैं, वो एक्सपैंड कैसे होता है, जब वो खुलता है उसका रंग कैसे आता है, जब उसके ऊपर तितली बैठती है तो वो सक कैसे करती है उसका नेक्टर, राइट. सो दिस इज व्हाट ऑब्जर्वेंस इज. एंड love makes us understand this observance, because whoever we love, our lover, we can just, you know, sit and stare at them for hours and hours and hours at end, because we like all their aspects, because we are in love with them because उनके physical, mental, emotional, financial तो नहीं खैर, सारे aspects हमको अच्छे लगते हैं, right. तो सेटिस्फैक्शन तो मुझे तो ऐसे ही लगता है कि ऑब्जर्वेंस से सबसे ज्यादा स्टिम्युलेट होती है सेटिस्फैक्शन, जब आप किसी चीज को ऑब्जर्व करेंगे, क्योंकि life is not a time lapse, you know. Maybe someone can make a time lapse of your life, and maybe at your deathbed they can show you that time lapse and you can be happy, but life is not a time lapse. और कल जो मैं दुखी हूँ, आज मैं खुश हूँ, आज मैं तुमसे बात कर रही हूँ अच्छे से, हो सकता है कल मेरी लाइफ में कोई और टर्मोइल भी आ जाए, मैं वापस से दुखी हो जाऊं, राइट. So you need to make yourself come at a level where you are somewhere, you are neutral, where you enjoy everything, you enjoy the dant that you get, also you enjoy the appreciation that you get, also you enjoy the tali that you get, also you enjoy the gali that you get also, because all of these things make you, right. So I think observance is the one keyword that you need to latch on to.
Do you think it's with that observation that one gets to awareness? Because I think awareness is what you're sort of trying to get at now, because that's what Socrates, Buddha, and all these people said. Ki, Acha, if you're seeing a flower, that's what I think. That's the core thing that Socrates said. Agar if you're seeing a flower, don't think about acha. If you want to pluck it and give it to a friend of yours or something of that sort, just watch the flower. Or I think,
Hmm.
but this can be done in any sort of thing as well. When you're something I share on my podcast often is that something I've started off recently is that when I sit down to eat a meal, I don't
Hmm.
have anything that's playing in the background, or if I'm reading a book or something, I'm just sitting down with my meal. I don't know. It's sort of really I don't know how to put it in words, but it's just that I'm more in tune with my food in some sense, and it sounds very basic and very like out there, but like, pata nahi, I'm just and I'm just more fulfilled after the thing, because I think in psychology also it's pretty much proven that if you're multitasking, then you're actually cognitively worse off in like the
Yes.
different things you're doing.
Yes, yes,
So
absolutely.
so yeah, I but it is really difficult to achieve, because I'm like, if I'm washing the dishes or if I'm in the shower, it's difficult to do if I don't have some song playing or a podcast playing in the background. But yeah, I think that is what it is though, isn't it?
How old are you?
I'm only 21, man. So
Okay, okay, okay. How old am I? What do you think?
I think, I'm not sure, but I think you mentioned this somewhere. I was watching an interviews of your, but I'm not 24, 25.
Hmm. Yeah. So I asked this question because I wanted to sort of gauge what generation you come off.
Yeah, pretty
Because
much same. Maybe you're a
but
couple of
yeah,
years young
I mean
elder to me.
we've I think because we are so close by in age, we've grown up in times where we did not have the internet at all. We did not have Instagram. We did not have. I don't know if you've grown up in that time or not, but I totally have. And वो भी जिंदगी जी है हमने, और अच्छी जी है. वो भी याद है हमें उस टाइम हम कहाँ वेकेशन करते थे, मजा आता था नहीं आता था, बीचेस पसंद थी, हिल्स पसंद थी. सो आई थिंक इट्स जस्ट अ पार्ट ऑफ लाइफ दैट वीव मेड, बिकॉज दिस इज हाउ द वर्ल्ड वर्क्स. बट अगर आज हम ये छोड़ना चाहे तो हम छोड़ भी सकते हैं. लाइक आई रिमेम्बर दिस
Hmm.
वन ऑथर who mentioned that he wakes up at 4 a.m. in the morning, and for 1 hour he sips onto his glass of water like it's wine, right? So every sip that he's having, he savors that sip, you know, and he thanks his body for being able to have that sip. He thanks whatever source the water has come out of. He thanks water for the fact कि वो उसकी प्यास बुझा रहा है, right? So that's the same with food also, and that's the same with everything else that we do in life also,
Hmm.
because we need, and that's where observance comes into the picture, because we need to be aware of what is happening to us. How is the body responding? How is the stomach churning when we are hungry? How is the headache happening when we've not had food for the entire day? So all of these are conscious things that you must observe for you to be a better person. मैं ये नहीं बोल रही कि अपने सर दर्द को लिख दो अपनी जर्नल में, मुझे अभी सर दर्द हो रहा था. I'm just trying to give you a very lay person example.
I mean, I think there are times when it comes easier than others. So, for example, like because I'm Hindu, so on Ekadashi, I try observing like a water fast,
Yeah.
and those sorts of periods of time. And I think I've spoken about this as well. Ki when I'm fasting, as you said, with that example of someone sipping on the glass of water,
Mhm.
I just appreciate the things around me and the people around me much more than I do generally, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I don't
Yeah.
know, it's maybe it's because of that deprivation or something of that sort.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think there is something to that.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, is there, I understand that we've been speaking for a while. um Something else I really wanted to ask you about, because we are speaking about this aspect of spirituality in some sense. um it sort of does tangle on to content creation in a manner. Do you think that because you are putting out vlogs and those sorts of things as well, does it ever come to your mind of when you're producing these vlogs and other videos, of how people would possibly perceive you, or possibly how difficult is it, or how is that sort of manner in which that you create your videos?
So the vlog thing happened because I did my first solo trip very far off from home. So I just wanted to document it and just put it out there for me to not, have a headache of storing it in SD cards and pen drives and all of that. So which is why the vlog happened. I don't usually vlog per se. Uh, and the second question that you asked, perception. I don't care. I don't care how people, because people are going to find कोई ना कोई नुक्स वो निकालेंगे, कोई ना कोई ऐप वो निकालेंगे और वो मुझ तक भेजेंगे. They will have the audacity to send it to me also and make me, I don't know, shame me for it. And I don't care. And there is a whole process that I have also followed to be able to be this carefree also. But but at the same time, I like being presentable. I like being in a mode wherein people uh, look at me through a certain lens, so that is there also. But if tomorrow you want to talk to me live on YouTube and you just want me to be you just say that just come in your pajamas now, I will be fine with it, because I don't really care. I don't really care. So I don't care about how people look at me, or how people, because people are going to have complaints all the time. That's मतलब इंसानी फितरत है, शिकायत उसको हमेशा रहती है, इसलिए हम इंसान हैं. So that's fine. I mean, it's fine. So I don't care. Bottom line.
Nice. I mean, there isn't, because we've got into a lot and I understand we're short of time as well. The last question I generally like asking my viewers is that my guests rather, is that are there some books that have influenced you in the way you sort of look at the world, and maybe if there are some recommendations that you could throw my way?
Books
Yeah.
is what you're asking.
Or anything. It could be like I don't know, fiction books, coloring books, movies,
Well, I
whatever
have a
catches your
whole
fancy.
library right behind me, so yes, I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
give
yeah, yeah.
you. What kind of recommendations do you want though?
What kind of stuff do you generally like reading?
I like reading all, all things. I'm not a very choosy and a picky person, but I do like uh, reading books on real life and real lives that have been lived, and most of them are very controversial. Maybe they they can be lives that have ended into murders and lives that have ended into tragedies and all that. I don't know. I might be a sadist person. You can say that. One book that I like very much is Kanvil Badosh. I'll just give you a recommendation. Then what do I like? I think one recommendation I'll give.
Okay.
I have so many ना ये वीडियो फिर 3 घंटे की हो जाएगी. I think this is one book that I would want to recommend. This is a book, The Sensational Life and Death of Kandil Baloch, written by Sanam Mahir. And this is basically, I don't know if you know Kandil Baloch or not. She was this model from Pakistan who was very out there, very bold. And she was one of the very few women in Pakistan who, you know, bared her body for music videos and, you know, did not care of what people were thinking. And she was a trailblazer for women in Pakistan, basically, because she fought for their rights through, you know, the use of her body, through the use of her confidence, through the use, all of that. And eventually, after having a mad kind of fame, even right now, if you go and search on YouTube, just type in her name, and you will see so many videos of her in a very bold avatar, you know, being a Pakistani woman with having all her restrictions and all her forms in place. And she was honor killed eventually by her own brother, younger brother, recently only. I think it was 2018 when she was murdered in her own house, in the house that she bought for her family recently only, when she made massive amount of money from a particular project. She was providing for the food, the shelter, everything. So basically her family of, I think, three brothers, two parents, was running on her income, which she was earning from all her modeling projects, all, you know, all this sensational work that she was doing. She was considered a mad woman in Pakistan. She still is considered a mad woman in Pakistan. But the fact that she was intelligent enough to provide for her family for a very long time, and eventually, मतलब वहां पर उसको बोलते हैं कि इज्जत के नाम पे कत्ल कर दिया गया उसको. तो इवेंचुअली उसने सब कुछ किया अपने परिवार के लिए, अपने, it's like selling your body in Pakistan. Wearing a body for a woman is like selling your body. It's like going in the flesh trade. उसने सब कुछ किया और eventually she was killed by her own younger brother, right? So it's a very very tragic, and it's a very very, मतलब मैंने ये किताब 2 बार पढ़ने की कोशिश की है. I think the first time I read it was in 2019. Then I tried reading it in 2021, and both the times I have left it at what, 69 pages, because after the 69th page I get massive anxiety and I can't read after that because it's filled with so much horror. um so yeah, but I do want to finish it someday, of course, and I do want people to read it because, you know, this is the life of a woman, not just in Pakistan but in India also, because we have so many restrictions on our lives. We have restrictions on our body, on our clothing, on the way we speak, on the way we, मतलब हम किस तरीके से नजर झुका के उठाते हैं और किसी को देखते हैं, उस पे भी हमें जज किया जाता है. So it's an interesting read, and we must try and, you know, just traverse those boundaries.
Look, Rinda, that's a great recommendation. I'll keep it up. And thanks for coming on once again. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Just
Thank you
before
so
you go, if there's anything you'd like to plug, your socials, anywhere people can find your work, obviously things will be there on the show notes as well. But if there's anything that you'd like to plug, feel free.
I am not a pluggy person.
Plugger.
Not a plugger. But yeah, you can just do a simple Google search on Vrinda Vaid. You'll find all my work.
All right. Thank you once again, Rinda. I'd love to have this conversation sometime again in the future,
Absolutely,
maybe in
yeah.
person.
Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ishan. All the best for all the other guests that you're going to get on all walks of life. And I hope you're able to walk these paths with all these people and, you know, have a bit of their life also.
That's DM. Thank you so much. Thank you. So yeah, guys, that was my conversation with Vrinda. I really enjoyed it. I don't know how you guys are going to take it because I haven't sort of streamed for a while. um I just thought it would be a little more interactive, because I understand that many a times if I'm simply uploading it, uh I don't know if people would kind of prefer this or kind of preferred it just as a standstill video. Obviously people can obviously come back and watch this again, which I think many people would do. But I will end it here today. I understand. I thank everyone for actually tuning in, whoever was on board. So thank you once again, and I'll see you guys later.